The school hallways were an entirely different world for Eva and Isla. Gone were the familiar tree-lined streets of Milford, where they had known every corner, every neighbor. Now, they found themselves in a bustling, unfamiliar building that seemed to stretch forever, filled with faces that were either indifferent or curious. As they walked side by side down the new school's wide, echoing corridors, Isla took in the scene with wide eyes and a skip in her step, her natural energy and excitement bubbling up despite the overwhelming change. Eva, on the other hand, felt a deep unease that gnawed at her. The walls seemed too high, the voices too loud, and the air too thick with the scent of something she couldn't quite place. A tightness formed in her chest, making her footsteps heavier with each step they took. Isla, ever the adventurous spirit, bounded ahead, eager to make the best of their first day. But Eva trailed behind, her gaze flickering nervously from one unfamiliar face to another. They were twins, but they couldn't have approached this new chapter more differently. It wasn't long before they were separated by the class schedules. Isla's bubbly personality quickly earned her a few curious glances, which soon turned into friendly introductions. She fit right in, effortlessly. Eva, meanwhile, found herself standing alone in her classroom, her fingers clutching her school bag strap as if it were a lifeline. For Eva, the day quickly became a blur of overwhelming introductions, confusing directions, and sharp whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. She could feel eyes on her and hear the barely concealed giggles as she fumbled her way through her first few hours. It started subtly at first, a nudge in the hallway, a whisper behind her back. The other girls would glance at her as if she was some sort of strange curiosity, something that didn't quite fit in their tightly knit world. As the days went on, the whispers became louder, the nudges harder, and the stares more pointed. One afternoon, Eva found herself alone in the schoolyard. She had retreated to a quiet corner near the trees, clutching her book in an attempt to escape the cruel world around her. The bullying was never overt, never something that could easily be pointed out or reported. It was insidious, a whispered insult here, a snide comment there. They would laugh when she tripped, hide her things when she wasn't looking, or make remarks just loud enough for her to hear, but quiet enough to avoid detection by any teacher. Eva sat under the shade of a tree, trying to lose herself in her book, but the words on the page blurred together as her eyes welled with unshed tears. She wasn't sure how much more she could take. Her mind raced back to Milford, where she had felt safe, where things had made sense, and where she had Isla by her side. Here, she felt adrift, like a ship without an anchor, and no amount of books could shelter her from the growing storm. Meanwhile, Isla thrived. She had made friends within the first week, her lively personality naturally drawing others in. But as she sat with her new group during lunch, she noticed something. Eva, her quieter, more reserved sister, was sitting alone at the far end of the lunchroom. Eva's shoulders were hunched, her eyes glued to the floor, and there was a group of girls nearby, snickering and exchanging glances. It didn't take long for Isla to figure out what was happening, but Isla hesitated. She and Eva had always been different after all. Isla was the bold one, the one who jumped into situations without thinking twice, while Eva preferred to retreat into her own world. She faced her crisps and continued eating. The following day, the bullying escalated. During gym class, one of the girls, Rachel, a tall, athletic girl with a sharp tongue, decided to make Eva her target. As the class played a game of dodgeball, Rachel took every opportunity to throw the ball at Eva, harder and harder each time, until finally, with a loud thud, the ball smacked Eva squarely in the chest, sending her sprawling to the floor. The laughter was immediate, echoing across the gym like the sound of shattering glass. Eva's body hit the cold, hard floor with a thud that seemed to echo in her very bones. The air was knocked from her lungs, leaving her gasping, her chest burning as she tried to draw in a breath. She lay there, paralyzed for a moment, the sting of the dodgeball still radiating through her chest, but it was the laughter that hit harder, cutting deeper than any physical pain. It started as a low hum, then swelled to a chorus that filled the gym, a mocking, merciless sound that vibrated in her skull. She could hear them, Rachel's sharp cackle, the giggles from the other girls, their voices blending into a cruel symphony that made her skin prickle with shame. Her face flushed with heat, a rush of blood that burned her cheeks and made her feel small, exposed, like a spotlight had found her in this vast gym, and everyone could see exactly how much of a failure she was. The tears came fast, stinging her eyes, a familiar burn that she tried to fight back. Don't cry. Not here, not in front of them. She blinked hard, willing them away, but the pressure built, a tight knot in her throat threatening to choke her. The world around her blurred for a second, her vision swimming as she fought to stay in control, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She could feel their eyes on her, cold and predatory, like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to get up, to run, to hide, anything to escape the weight of their stares. But her limbs felt heavy, as though her body had betrayed her, pinning her down to the cold gym floor where she was vulnerable, laid bare before her tormentors. Her heart pounded in her ears, a frantic, uneven rhythm that only made the silence in her head more deafening. Why wasn't anyone helping her? She darted her gaze toward the teacher, desperately hoping for a sign of rescue, but he was turned away, oblivious, too engrossed in whatever task had stolen his attention. Of course, no one had seen, no one ever saw. Not when it counted. The realization settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She was alone in this, always alone. The laughter rang louder, the sound pressing in from all sides, and she wished she could sink into the floor, disappear entirely. If they can't see me, maybe they'll stop, but there was no escape, no one to protect her from the onslaught. No safe place in this hostile world where she could breathe. The humiliation was a weight, heavy and oppressive, sitting in her chest, threatening to crush her entirely. And yet, somewhere beneath the pain, a flicker of anger sparked. A tiny, defiant flame that refused to be snuffed out. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. This isn't fair. Why me? Why do they always pick me? But even as the thoughts surfaced, they were drowned out by the overwhelming sense of helplessness that had gripped her since she'd stepped foot in this school. This was just how it was now. Except she wasn't alone. "Hey, what's your problem?" a voice rang out, sharp and unwavering, cutting through the cruel laughter. It was Isla. Eva's heart leapt at the sound, her head snapping toward the entrance of the gym. Isla stood there, her face flushed, but it wasn't from embarrassment or exertion. It was anger, a seething, righteous fury that Eva had never seen in her before. Gone was the carefree Isla, the one who danced through life with wild abandon. In her place stood someone fiercer, more commanding, a storm contained within the slight frame of a girl. Her long, dark ponytail swayed with every determined step as she crossed the gym, her normally warm, playful eyes now alight with a fire that seemed to burn right through Rachel and the others. Her brows were furrowed in a way that made her appear older, more formidable, as if daring anyone to challenge her. "Leave her alone," Isla's voice cut through the gym, silencing the laughter. Rachel sneered, rolling her eyes. "What's the matter? Can't your sister fight her own battles? She shouldn't have to." Isla shot back, stepping closer, her eyes never leaving Rachel's. "Not with people like you around." For a moment, the gym was deathly quiet. The tension between the girls was palpable, a thick, almost tangible force that seemed to hang in the air. Eva, still on the ground, looked up at her sister, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and gratitude. She had never seen Isla so serious, so determined. Rachel opened her mouth to retort, but Isla didn't give her the chance. "You think it's funny to pick on someone just because they're quiet, because they don't fight back?" Isla's voice was steady, but there was a fire in her tone, one that dared anyone to challenge her. Rachel hesitated. The rest of the girls, who had been laughing moments before, now looked uncertain, casting nervous glances at one another. "Eva might not like to fight," Isla continued, her voice dropping slightly, "but I do. And if you touch her again, you'll have to deal with me." The room was still. Rachel, for all her bravado, was visibly taken aback. She glanced at her friends, but they offered no support, shrinking back as Isla stood her ground. Finally, Rachel scoffed and muttered, "Whatever," before turning away, but the damage had been done. The spell of her bullying had been broken, and everyone in the room knew it. Eva, with Isla by her side, was no longer an easy target. As the rest of the class slowly returned to their game, Isla knelt beside Eva, offering her hand. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice now devoid of the earlier anger, replaced by the familiar warmth that Eva had always known. Eva nodded, taking her sister's hand and pulling herself to her feet. "Thanks," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Isla shrugged, but there was a softness in her eyes. "We're sisters. we stick together. It might have sounded just like an assurance to Eva, but to Isla, this was a promise. In the days that followed, the bullying stopped. Word spread quickly that Isla, the bold, fearless twin, had taken a stand and no one dared to cross her again. But more than that, something shifted between the sisters. The invisible line that had once separated them, the unspoken divide that had kept their worlds apart, began to fade. Ela still bounded through life with her usual energy, but now Eva knew she wasn't alone. She realized that despite their differences, Isla would always have her back. And Isla, for her part, had discovered something deeper than her love for adventure, a fierce loyalty to her sister, one that couldn't be shaken by bullies or circumstances. They might have been different, but they were twins, and that bond, fragile as it had once seemed, was unbreakable. At home, as they sat together in their shared room, Isla turned to Eva with a playful grin, her eyes glinting with a mixture of mischief and sincerity. "You know," she said, nudging Eva's shoulder, "we're stronger together." Eva glanced over, meeting her sister's gaze. There was a warmth in Isla's smile that made her chest swell with a feeling she hadn't experienced in weeks. She had always known her sister was bold, the kind of person who never hesitated to dive headfirst into anything. But that day was entirely different. Isla hadn't just been bold for herself, she had been bold for Eva, standing up for her in a way she hadn't expected. Eva smiled back, her heart lighter, as if the weight she'd been carrying since the bullying began had finally been lifted. "Yeah," she said softly, her voice carrying a newfound sense of peace. "I guess we are." In that small shared moment, the air between them shifted. There were no need for grand gestures or lengthy conversations. Their bond, the invisible thread that had always connected them, even when they seemed worlds apart, had quietly reasserted itself, stronger than ever before. And from that moment on, they were. The days that followed weren't suddenly perfect. There were still arguments over silly things, like whose turn it was to pick the movie or who got the last biscuit. They were still different in so many ways. Ela, with her boundless energy and contagious laughter, and Eva, with her quiet, thoughtful nature and love for stillness. But now those differences didn't feel like walls dividing them. They had learned the hard way that the world outside could be cruel, filled with people who wouldn't hesitate to exploit those differences or make them feel small. But no one, not Rachel, not the other bullies, not the whispering voices in the hallways, could come between the bond they shared. They might not always see eye to eye. They might have different dreams, different ways of facing the world. But they were twins, two halves of a whole, balancing each other in ways they were just beginning to understand. And no matter what the world threw at them, they knew one truth above all else. Together they were stronger than they could ever be apart.